Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this special edition of Defense News Weekly, we're in Singapore for the 2020 Singapore Airshow. We'll look at the impact of the coronavirus on the show, get you the news from the event, and break down the 2021 defense budget request that was released this week. With in-depth interviews, up-close video, and leading analysis, this is Defense News Weekly. Welcome to this week's edition of Defense News Weekly. I'm Jeff Martin, here in Singapore. We've been here all week for the 2020 Singapore Airshow, which has been marred by the impact of the coronavirus that is sweeping across Asia. Now, before we get into some of the news of the show and the impact the virus had, let's look at some news that came out of D.C. as the 2021 federal budget request has been released. Now, there's a lot of change in this budget for the U.S. military. Things like a pay raise, an increased focus on research and development, and the proposal to retire older legacy equipment. And that is surely to be controversial on Capitol Hill. When it comes to the number on this budget, things remained relatively flat compared to last year, which isn't what defense officials have pushed for, as they've been looking for 3 to 5% of real growth. Now, in an event at the Pentagon to mark the rollout of this budget, here's what Deputy Defense Secretary David Norquist had to say.
The 2021 budget request is the next step in implementing the National Defense Strategy and focuses on all domain operations. Now, this budget is a little different because the top line is flat at $705 billion for defense, no growth for inflation. That means that we had to make additional tough choices and major cuts in some areas in order to free up money to continue to invest in preparing for the high-end fight.
To get more coverage of that 2021 federal budget request, be sure to head over to defensenews.com. Now, bringing things back to here in Singapore, we started out our week talking to the commander of Pacific Air Forces, Air Force General Charles Brown. Now, in that roundtable, he brought up one thing that actually relates to the budget, which is how do you balance the need for current capability with the need to have money to invest in the future? Here's what he had to say.
So it's interesting, the way General Goldfein describes it, there's a natural tension between a combatant commander and the service chief, where the combatant commander is focused on the next year to 2 to 3 years, and the service chief is looking 10 to 15 years out. The way I look at it is there's risk over time, and part of that is not only how do we set ourselves up for success in the near term, but how do we actually look at it out to another 10 to 15 years. And you do have to make some tough choices. I think my job is to advocate in support of Admiral Davidson for the things he's looking at, but also at the same time be able to talk about the risk today as I also look to the risk of the future. Because I think one of my priorities is being postured for the future for PACAF, and so I got to think about not only just the time that I'm in this job, but the folks that come in behind me. And so there is some natural tension, and I have to talk to the air staff about certain things, but I also have to have a bigger picture associated with how we look at the aspects. And I think the key part, as we look at our strategy, is when I say rethink about how we think about the Pacific. If we keep doing things the same way we do it, day in, day out today, that'll create challenges for us in the future. And we got to acknowledge, part of that and how we move forward to rethink how we do things.
So as you saw in that clip, General Brown is focused on what he needs to meet the requirements he has in the Pacific Theater. So we decided to ask him, what else do you need? Here's what he had to say.
I don't know if there's any one particular platform I'd say that we need more of. The things I do think about are our capacity logistically. And so I would actually want to pre-position more capability into the region. It doesn't initially have to be big packages, but small packages we can put in different locations to speed up our ability to respond to any type of crisis, whether it's a humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, or a full-blown contingency. I think tankers will be a key aspect of this. Not that I have to have them in the theater, but I need to make sure that they're available to have the capacity to move, and same with lift. And then kind of talking to the bomber piece, the value of the bomber is the hung range and multiple weapons load. And then with all that though, in order to be able to command and control it, That's another aspect. So there's a number of things on my list, I would say. There's things I do think about that actually, how do we actually lay down some of the aspects associated with that to make sure we have the capacity to be responsive to provide for the security, assurance and deterrence within the region.
Another thing General Brown talked to us about was the Air Force's plan to retire 17 older B-1 bombers. Here's what he had to say.
The B-1 is critical to some aspects of the maritime capability. But I also take a look at when you're trying to make the balance between on a budget where, and really, I'll tell you, we flew the B-1s very hard in the CENTCOM AOR.
Yeah.
And that's what's caused part of the challenge they've run into. And so part of this discussion here is, do you put a bunch of money into, preserve that at the expense of some other things you're going to be able to do to give you other capabilities? So that to me is where, that's why I say thinking differently, because if we keep down the same path and go, hey, we just got to keep the B-1s, well, what opportunity, what are we missing out on in the future that we may need to think about? Okay, if the weapons pairing with that platform makes sense today, but that you're not going to have B-1s forever. So what is it going to look like in the future? And so how do you start making a transition to? And this is the first step of making a transition, I think.
To keep up to date with all of our coverage, be sure to visit our Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn pages. Also, be sure to add us on Apple's News app and other platforms for the latest updates. And when we come back, we'll break down the news from this year's air show and the impact of the coronavirus on the event. Now, one thing that's been on everyone's mind here in Singapore has been the outbreak of the coronavirus, which is spreading across Asia. Now, while we were here, multiple companies such as Lockheed Martin and Raytheon pulled out of the Singapore Airshow entirely. So at the pre-show media day, we talked to event organizers about balancing the need to keep people safe, but also wanting people to come out to the show.
I know the situation is trying, but I think we need to balance. Business life needs to go on. And so we make this platform available. And of course, we see participants, we see exhibitors, we see trade visitors who are making their way here on their own accord. So that's how we see that they see value in it, and we just need to balance. And when they come in here, we're doing all the measures that I mentioned to make sure that we take care of their well-being. So I think this is how we balance it out, as you say, make the platform available, but make sure that we ensure that we take all the precautionary measures, the well-being is taken care of.
Now, the unofficial leader of the American presence at a lot of these shows is the Aerospace Industries Association. So I talked to their president and CEO, Eric Fanning, about the decision that some companies made to pull out of the show.
Maybe it's a half show, but one half that's pretty well attended, another half that's not. There's certainly a lot of cancellations, and you can feel that the attendance is down just walking around.
Mm-hmm.
But we also have the biggest U.S. military contingent we've ever had in Singapore.
Mm-hmm.
U.S. military is here. There's a big U.S. delegation. Still a lot of companies that are here, but no question attendance is down because of the virus. Well, every company has got to make its own decision. I wasn't worried about myself, but when you're making decisions for your team, it's an entirely different calculus.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're making decisions for a team and you're not planning on going, then you're probably going to be more conservative, and I understand that. No question about what anyone's decision was, why they didn't come or why they did come.
Now, while most of the focus at the show, at the beginning at least, was on the coronavirus and the companies that pulled out, there was still a lot of other things going on. To get a wrap-up of things, I talked to our Asia correspondent, Mike Yeo. All right, Mike, so thanks for joining me here at the air show. So kind of what have your impressions been of this show? Because it's been a little strange with all the coronavirus impact.
Yes, obviously it's been a bit quiet. We've kind of dropped in the number of visitors. That's pretty much obvious from looking at the show halls. And then there's about 80 companies that have cancelled their participation in the show so far. So it's unusual to see Singapore Airshow being this quiet, but at least things are still happening.
And the traffic into the show has been light. That's been one nice part. Getting in. So talk to me a little bit about some of the news we've seen here. What's your impression been?
Well, the big news today is Airbus announcing that Singapore is joining the A330 MRTT, multi-role tanker transport automatic boom refueling program. They will be introducing a new automatic boom system that will reduce the workload on the aerial refueling officer. A lot of it will be done automatically, and basically the ARO's job will now be to observe the refueling process and to make any decisions that will need to be made. But it will reduce workload for the air refueling officer.
So that's a big deal for Singapore. I mean, they've made tankers a really big part of their procurement push over the past several years. In fact, buying more than what they had at KC-135s. What does that mean for you for their need to project power?
Well, it's not just the need to project power because Singapore has got training detachments based all over the world. They do a lot of their training overseas in Australia. They have permanent detachments based in the US, and there will be occasions where they will need to support and sustain these training operations, and as well as to carry all the equipment with them. So the MRTT can do that. It can carry fuel. It takes on fuel from its own fuel tanks, so it can refuel aircraft and yet still carry cargo at the same time. And that's been a big plus for Singapore.
So another issue that we've seen talk thing about here is Singapore and the F-35. Mm-hmm. What's your take? Where do things stand?
Well, as far as we know, the Singaporeans have made the official DSCA request, and the State Department has approved the potential sale of 4 F-35s firm, F-35Bs that are firm, and then 8 aircraft on options. There was supposed to be a signing ceremony here this year at the Airshow, but due to Lockheed Martin's non-participation and the reduction in the Pentagon's delegation, that has not happened, which is a bit disappointing.
And because that was one thing we were hoping to see at the show, was Singapore seeing an aircraft in Singaporean colors and all these other things like that, and we didn't get that. But we got to see one flying. What did you think of the flying display of the F-35?
Oh, that was great. It's the first time in this region that we've seen both 5th generation fighter jets take to the air at the Singapore Airshow, and that is quite a newsworthy item itself for the Airshow. And then obviously you have the People's Liberation Army Air Force from China with their J-10s and the Pa-E demonstration team. So it is a nice mix of aircraft participating at the Airshow this time around.
The Pa-E, their participation was very controversial, being with China, being with the coronavirus going on right now. How do you think the reception has been here at the show?
I think there are people who are happy to see them here, definitely, because it's the first time they're performing at the Singapore Airshow. Given this year being the 30th anniversary of diplomatic ties between Singapore and the People's Republic of China, I think the authorities are very glad that they've actually managed to pull this off. So it's definitely been a big draw, and it will be a big draw during the public days as well.
All right, as we wrap up here, one final question for you. We got a ton of statics displays out on the ramp. What's your favorite?
The favorite, it will definitely be the Singaporean Airbus A330 MRTT, because it's the first time it's at the static display at the Singapore Airshow, given that the first one was only delivered, I think, at the end of 2018, if my memory serves me correctly. So it's been good to see it here.
All right, Mike, thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. Let's go out and have a good rest of the show.
Yep. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me here.
Now, one question you might be asking is, why Singapore? Why is it so important for the United States to have a presence here, especially at things like the Singapore Airshow? Well, to answer that question, we asked the Commander of Pacific Air Forces, General Charles Brown. Here's what he had to say.
Well, I think it's our long-term relationship. It's a relationship we have with the training attachments, whether it be in different parts of the United States, the potential for a training attachment upcoming in Guam, and the fact that the equipment that the Republic of Singapore Air Force flies, at least on the Air Force side, is mostly U.S. And so based on that, that shows to me a real importance. And then logistically, when you look at the region, a little bit of a logistics hub here, opportunity here in Singapore as well. But what I've seen over the years is a very strong relationship between our two countries, and our air forces think a lot alike and fly a lot of the same equipment, so that actually makes it very beneficial.
Now, one aircraft that was on static display here at the show was the Boeing P-8 Poseidon, which is a maritime patrol aircraft that's been sold to the U.S. Navy and several allied nations. Now, while we were here, I decided to get an update from Boeing on some upgrades that the Navy is looking to do to their P-8s. While it may look like a commercial airliner on the outside, the P-8 Poseidon is far from that. Things like a bomb bay, weapons hardpoints on the wings, the ability to eject sonobuoys, and advanced sensors and communication gear inside make it one of the more advanced aircraft flying today. But it could be soon getting a lot more capability, as the Navy is looking to add things like the Quick Strike Mine, the long-range anti-ship missile, and other weapons to that aircraft. It could almost, in fact, make the P-8 a bomber. So while we were here at the Singapore Airshow, I decided to talk to Boeing about some of the capabilities and the future of this aircraft.
The capability opportunities for the P-8 are quite endless. So what that does, it opens the aperture for a variety of air forces and navies around the world that want to employ the P-8 in a variety of ways. So by adding new capabilities, whether it be weapons or new sensors, that opens that aperture for greater demand. So we think it helps with that demand piece for international. So it's a 737-800, but it's been ruggedized already, and it's got wing pylons for weapons. It's already can accommodate those new future growth weapons, so there's no real modification required. It's more of a airworthiness certification process to then clear those stores. But from an aircraft modification standpoint, it's fairly seamless.
Now, while the aircraft was designed as a maritime patrol aircraft, there are some other roles that it can take on. Here's what Boeing had to say about the other things a P-8 can do.
It can do a variety of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance missions as well. I think a good case in point is recently there were bushfires down in Australia, and they were employing the P-8 to do bushfire surveillance. So it talks about the utility of the aircraft. Many nations are also using it in humanitarian assistance. It can accommodate search and rescue kits that can be launched from the weapons bay. So it can be employed in search and rescue capacity as well.
Now, to get more coverage of the P-8 and the maritime patrol aircraft shortage in Asia, be sure to visit defensenews.com. Now, one company that was here at the airshow was Israeli defense company Rafael. They're in the process of working with the U.S. Army on several defense programs. Here's an update on them from their CEO.
We are very proud that we were chosen, first of all, to bring the Iron Dome. 1 year after, we were chosen to bring the trophy. And without getting to all the details, because the decision was not made yet, but it was published, of course, that we brought the spike air loss to a test that was done by the U.S. Army Aviation. And again, it's part of the concept. You can improve the efficiency of the platform by adding the missile. Again, part of our strategy is to bring the best weapon system that are combat proven to the US market, doing it with our strategic partner, the tier 1 companies, and to make those products, at the end of the day, a US product by this kind of partnership. Well, we are focused, first of all, to fulfill our commitments. So I'm pleased to say that we are working according to schedule as for supplying the trophy system for the brigade, the Abrams Brigade. We are now in the process of producing the batteries that we committed to transfer to deliver the two batteries of Iron Dome to the U.S. Army. And we're looking for the next step with the spike NLOS, as you mentioned. The moment the decision will be taken, we will, of course, will be able to support it. I assume that the moment that they will ask for a lot of missiles, together with our partners, with the US partner, we'll be able to supply just on time, as we did it in the past, and we prove it is the trophy. So this is why we are working with our strategic partner in the United States in order to make it happen.
Don't go away. When we come back, we're going to discuss the valley of death, at least when it comes to defense. On this week's Money Minute, Navy Federal Credit Union personal finance expert Jeanette Mack offers her latest tips.
If you're not investing for retirement or the future, ask yourself why not. A lot of people put off investing or even saving for an emergency because they think they don't have enough money. A recent Navy Federal survey found that 66% of military members and their families aim to build an emergency fund before investing. But not as many are actually doing it. It can start with as little as $5 a week. That's only $20 a month. This money can help if you have a car issue, a health issue, or something unexpected comes up. The goal is to save at least 3 to 6 months of pay and reserve that for emergencies only. Once you surpass this goal, you can think about moving on to investing. You should already be doing this in your TSP or 401k. But if you're looking to give your nest egg a boost, you can open a brokerage account and sock away money for your future with as little as $25 every month, only $5 more than you were saving for your emergency fund. Over time, you'll see the effects of compounded returns as you accrue interest. To get started, talk to a financial advisor you feel comfortable with. And don't be afraid to talk savings and investments. Even the smallest savings habits can help you finish big.
Thanks, Jeanette. We'll see you next week. To get more defense news coverage, be sure to visit our website at defensenews.com and subscribe to our Early Bird Brief, which is delivered to your inbox every weekday morning to get you ready to start the day. And when we come back, we're going to look at the valley of death, or at least the valley of death when it comes to defense. The Valley of Death sounds pretty ominous, and in the defense circles, it means the time it takes between when the Pentagon decides they like a program and when it actually really gets off the ground and the money gets flowing. Now, at a recent roundtable convened by Defense News, we discussed that topic. Here's what everyone had to say.
Danielle, have you guys had any issues with IP? I mean, is there...
No, we have not. I was going to say it's not IP, sorry to turn it a bit back, but I feel like there's a lot of help at the early stage. So when you need like your first like NRE or prototype program or whatnot, but for instance, for a company like us where we already have a program of record with the DoD, where the funding for this program of record runs out next year, it's so unclear what's happening next. Yeah. We did not get this program of record through anything having to do with DIU. We personally have not benefited from the DIU yet. We have presented at many like pitch things and a lot of interest that we follow up on ourselves. But how could the DIU or other other folks in the DoD help a company like us that's already had a successful program? They came back for their executed their options 4 times, but now the funding is out. Like even the program officer for that program doesn't know where we go next within the Army. So
you demonstrated success. You
Correct.
got the revenue, and now you have nowhere to go because
with
that particular
use case.
I mean, and that's that transition that you talked about, the transition problem.
Right, and it's a successful product that was not necessarily prototyped to us, but still solved a DoD problem, and then just.
Yeah, I get a lot of emails from whether it's DIU or other folks saying, here's seed pitches, startup pitches, like very early stage stuff that's not helpful to us now. And so that's in part why we've been spending more time, frankly, on civilian public safety, because even though they also DHS is consistently under CR, they seem to move faster.
That's interesting. Yeah. So what do you, and that's a good point, and perhaps it's also a VC question, but where do you go in a situation like that? Because that's the long-term growth and the ability to scale, which we spoke about, comes down to dependence on future contracts. So I don't know what the answer is to that.
Well, the answer is DIU.
Yeah.
No, but humor aside, whenever we launch a solicitation again, the legwork around it has been done. The path to transition has been vetted. Once we open that solicitation, it will close within 2 weeks. We will assess. There'll be a phase 2 set of pitches, after which there will be an award. So anything that we engage in, there will be a contract award at the end of that process, which should last.
Is there enough, though, kind of more at the stage where
we've already done multi-million dollar
contract
right.
roadmap, I guess? Is there a roadmap that Daniela could look to and say, hey, here's some potential?
How do we take this successful program of record that's pending through no fault of our own? It's just that's the program.
Like DIU, is DIU focusing enough on the stage 2, for lack of a better word, of incubation versus, here, get your foot in the door?
All of the above, including that stage 3 transition, which isn't necessarily part of the SBIR program. But we do start with the gap, right? So at this point, we can't boil the ocean. We try and engage with the problem sets where we feel we can have the biggest impact with the Pentagon, biggest impact with commercial technology or commercially valuable technologies. And again, those are vetted so that they can go through to transition. But we're limited by the resources that we have. Now, these resources are growing, but again, we're dealing with these $750 billion.
I would also say, I find a lot of times in these conversations, people come back to is DIU doing enough? Is In-Q-Tel doing enough? Is AFWERX doing enough? Is SOFWERX doing enough? Which I think is kind of funny because that they're actually the most functional part. And so it's wait, why are we criticizing DIU? The problem is the program office. It makes me so uncomfortable to even talk about what DIU could do better, because the answer is the program offices have to do better. That's the answer.
Well, and it's almost that DIU is fulfilling its mission, but there is another mission or another bubble of need that is not getting filled.
There's all these weird perverse incentives once you get into the program offices, where there's career considerations, there's long-standing relationships with primes, there's kind of crazy RFP processes that, because of that multi-year budgeting process that Lockheed Martin has been talking to these program offices for years as they're putting together the RFP. And so it's like already kind of soft circled by the time the startup even appears to have that conversation.
Sorry to interrupt, but yeah, we see so many requirements are already outdated, but like you can't do anything about it anymore. Because they were set so long ago, where for instance, our technology just did not exist. You could not have situational awareness with mobile mesh networking down to the single operator 12 months ago. So how can we, we are not in the 2021 plan, the 2022 plan, maybe we'll get, I don't know.
This is the importance of out-of-cycle funding.
Right.
And the Reagan Institute report from this week highlighted that very clearly. That like if you can't figure out of-cycle funding for companies, then you're just going to get stuck in this multi-year budgeting process that, due to its very nature, is biased towards the integrators that have been playing the game long term.
Hey, thanks for watching our show here from Singapore this week. And be sure to get more coverage at defensenews.com. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Defense News is proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.